Now, Reiwa, I suppose you could compare them to Jeremy Corbyn in the UK or Bernie Sanders in the US when he was running sort of a left-wing populist party. And their origin is that we've talked in the past about the DPFP. We talked about them earlier, and they've sort of potentially forming a sort of loose agreement with LDP, the main party of Japan. They formed out of what used to be the Liberal Party. That's a former party of Japan. And what I believed happened, that the party agreed to sort of merge with what now is the DPFP, which is sort of a centrist party. But I believe Reiwa was formed out of largely sort of more left-wing elements of what was the Liberal Party. So sort of an old left-wing party. The centrists moved over to DPFP, and the more left-wing elements, unhappy with that decision, they've now largely formed a big block of what is now Reiwa. They're also interesting in that they're led by a former actor, Taro Yamamoto. I know him best, and perhaps his best-known film is Battle Royale. It's a fantastic film. Love Battle Royale. It's a great film. It's based on a book, which also is very good. Essentially about it's a sort of a dystopian novel where a group of teenagers are placed in an island and forced to fight for their survival. And I believe he plays sort of one of the more memorable characters. He's sort of a little bit of an outsider who's not known by the main group, and he has a very pivotal role in the film. And he's gone from that, had further roles, and he's now entered politics. And again, I thought an interesting contrast. We talked about the Conservative Party of Japan last week. The leader of the Conservative Party of Japan, his pivotal element that triggered him to enter politics was the passing of the LGBT Understanding Act in Japan. That's made him essentially say, this has gone too far, I need to enter politics. Taro Yamamoto had a very similar moment, although he's, as we'll discuss, Reiwa is a very pro-LGBT party, or certainly more than the CPG. But unlike him, his sort of road to Damascus moment was he was very unhappy with sort of the way the Fukushima nuclear disaster scandal was handled, and he was just generally very upset about that whole incident in, I believe, 2011 when that happened. And as a result, he's now entered politics, and Reiwa is a very anti-nuclear party. And this Taro Yamamoto is a very interesting character. He's been involved in a couple of interesting incidents. One that stood out was this letter to the Emperor incident, where he was at a gathering of politicians where the Emperor of Japan, or at least his representatives, were present. And he wrote a letter, which I believe it's been stated contained his concerns about the way Fukushima was handled. I believe this is before he was in Reiwa, or Reiwa was as prominent. He wrote a letter stating his concerns about Fukushima, which obviously is political, it's a non-political gathering, wrote it down and passed it to the Emperor. And obviously this is very hot button, as since the Constitution of Japan and World War II, the Emperor is not meant to be involved directly in political issues by design. And it was a non-political gathering, but he passed it to him. It's unclear, I believe, whether he actually read it or not. And this caused a bit of an outcry that he was potentially violating the Constitution, and it was just a breach of protocol, and it basically shouldn't have been done. But very sort of, I suppose you could say, irreverent for the status quo. Very bold thing to do, you would call that. Another incident is he was involved in a protest in Parliament, where I believe the LDP were passing sort of a bill involving refugees or immigration, and he was sort of made a big protest, and he was sort of put his body on the line and was going to go get involved, and there was like this big sort of I suppose you call it a fracas in Parliament, and he had to be like held back by other people in Parliament to stop him making a sort of a protest and sort of stop proceedings. So that's quite evocative, to sort of not just oppose this bill, but to really get involved, start a big protest about it, and have to be held back by other members in Parliament. And I thought another thing, I think that I found quite interesting about it is I believe that in one election he had the chance potentially to enter Parliament because Reiwa, when entering the election, the leader Taro Yamamoto was on the list of potential candidates where you can place your preferred candidates in a list in order, and then based on the amount of votes your party gets, you might get 5-6 representatives, and you can say, okay, well, here's my top 6 or whatever. Now you would imagine he might be very keen as an actor turned politician, the leader of the party, to be enter Parliament But he didn't put himself first on the list. I believe he put himself third. And so he had sort of a lower preference. And the reason he did that is he wanted to make to, I believe, disabled or people who would require handicapped access. He put them as the party's first two representatives, the highest preference. And the reason he did that, I think he wanted to get greater representation in that respect in Parliament, and also this led to them having to adapt the House of Parliament to sort of have handicap access. Now, you could say, if you were being cynical, he wants attention for himself. I take the view, I think it's quite a nice thing for him to do that, to make it more accessible in that respect. It's a nice moment, of historical moment. And also, I think, yeah, I sort of see why you might be cynical about that, but I think it would be very alluring to someone who's the head of the party, who's under pressure to sort of represent themselves, get coverage for themselves, get attention, get themselves in front of the media to sort of promote their party, get more attention. It would be very compelling upon you to want to be in the Houses of Parliament. And like you said, he's been involved in these protests and things and sort of gave big controversial incidents where he gets attention. You'd think in Parliament he'd be very keen to get himself in there, but he chose not to do that and put this as like a higher priority, which I think is potentially quite nice. So anyway, in terms of the electoral result, now Reiwa, in the most recent election, 2024, they have a much significant representation, and it's sort of, like I said, of these new right-wing parties that have entered, Sanzato and the Conservative Party for Japan, who have 3 seats each. This could be something for them to look at, although they're right-wing populists, obviously, because the left-wing populists, Reiwa, they had 3 seats, but they've now tripled that to 9 seats, which is in the fractured Japan Parliament we have now, where there's a hung parliament, a minority government. That could be a very significant block. So to triple their votes as they did in the last election says that potentially Reiwa has staying power, that their message is getting through, and that's a very, very significant block. As I say, it's a significant increase in their number of seats. So quite impressive for them to do that in the last election. They've gone from 3 to 9 House of Representative members. So in terms of their previous election performance, as I say, they previously had 3 seats in the House of Representatives. That was in their 2021 election, their first election. They fielded 21 candidates, got in 3, and they, as I say, tripled that. Fielded a great number of candidates, 35 candidates, to get 9 representatives in the House of Representatives in 2024. And in terms of votes, in constituency, they went up very significantly. They went up from about 248,000 to 425,000. And in terms of the PR non-constituency votes, they went from 2.2 million votes to 3.8. So that's a very significant increase. They've gone to nearly 7% of the total vote there. So that really puts them on the map in terms of having a significant base of support. Other elections that perhaps might be worth considering, in the House of Councillors, the upper house, have 5 out of 248 representatives. They previously were on 2, so they have a bit of a presence there as well. And interestingly, in the Tokyo election in 2020, so this was sort of before they first entered the House of Representatives in the 2021 election, they got 657,000 votes in that vote for governor, 10%, and they finished 3rd, which I think is very respectable before they even had this presence in the House of Representatives. As I say, it's sort of quite a new party. So that was quite a significant result for them, I think, looking at it. And another interesting thing about the results is that unlike the CPJ, the Conservative Party for Japan, which is sort of a very much a regional focused power in terms of where they draw support, they're very focused on Nagoya. It's interesting that Reiwa is, I think, a little bit more broader spread in terms of where they draw their support and where their councillors and where their House of Representatives candidates have been elected in, which is more interesting about them. I suppose the sort of that left-wing populist message is sort of spread and has a certain amount of support in different areas. Now, in terms of the policies of Reiwa, one thing they're very prominent on is they want to get rid of the consumption tax. So tax on goods, they see that as sort of, I suppose, as sort of a left-wing populist party, they see that as hurting people on lower incomes more, and as that sort of being like non-progressive way of taxing people. So they want to essentially get rid of the consumption tax and instead get taxation from other areas. They want to raise the pension amounts, and they want to reduce social insurance premiums. That's very good for pensioners and people on low incomes who can't work anymore, who are sort of retired. So it's sort of quite progressive in that sense. And they want a sort of a seasonal inflation benefit. And I believe this is to counter out sort of rises in inflation in Japan at certain times. They want to offer people money at times when prices rise or where there's higher inflation, and sort of hand in hand with that, they also want sort of fuel payments and benefits to pay for heating, which is sort of a similar issue we have in the UK. We recently means tested in the UK fuel benefit payments, and Reiwa are very strong on sort of paying more to prevent sort of pensioner poverty, fuel poverty, that sort of thing. Also, very interestingly, they want to increase sort of the fishery and forestry industry to make sort of Japan more self-sufficient with food. And I thought that's quite interesting because it sort of stood out as being something similar to the Populist Party, the CPJ, but sort of coming at it from different, I suppose, angles. I suppose Reiwa, they want to secure the supply of food, I suppose you'd say, for people, and to have people feel secure in that, and to be less exposed to inflation and to sort of supply issues. But I suppose at the end of the day, it's the same thing. They both want to strengthen those industries. They want to also, as I've alluded to in the past, Taro Yamamoto's big political moment was his displeasure at the way Fukushima happened and the way that it was responded to. They're sort of very much an anti-nuclear party. That's a big part of their platform. And they also want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well. So I suppose they're leaning more into renewables potentially. And as well as being opposed to nuclear energy, they're also sort of very much in favour of peaceful diplomacy. They don't want Japan to be entirely reliant on the US for their personnel on Japan and their bases, but they want to sort of lean more into sort of being peaceful. They don't want unnecessary build-up of the military. But they are against nuclear weapons as well as general military build-up. So anti-nuclear in terms of nuclear weapons. They want sort of Japan to lead the path on sort of nuclear proliferation, getting rid of nuclear weapons, and also be anti-nuclear in terms of power. I suppose more from the Fukushima aspect. And so you can sort of see why, given Japan's history with Fukushima and its history with nuclear power in that respect, why nuclear is quite a hot button, and sort of some parties are opposed to it. And it's a bit more of a controversial issue than it would be perhaps in some countries where they hadn't had incidents like that. And finally, also, they're sort of, as I've alluded to, more pro-LGBT rights as compared to other parties. They're quite open about that, being pro-LGBT. And also, a political position I believe Reiwa have is that they're sort of less anti-immigration. He sort of put his body on the line, Taro Yamamoto, by hurting himself and making a big protest during the passing of an anti-refugee bill, which would allow Japan, sort of enable them to deport people who overstayed their visa. And so sort of that anti-refugee bill caused him to make a big protest. So I believe that would be their political stance generally as well, sort of less anti-immigration than some parties like CPJ, for example.